As you know, I am always telling ERGs or advising, I don't tell, I'm always inviting ERGs to have an impact on policy and process and other things as a way of having impact. But what if you don't know which policies you should actually be going for? Well, this is the video for you. So if when you hear me say that all the time, like banging that drum, you're sort of thinking, I've got no idea. Like, I can't even think of which policies we need to look at. Then this is the video for you, because I'm going to give you like 3 lenses that you can use to come up with which policies and or which processes your ERG could potentially influence and make an impact on. So where this came about, well, this is the ERG Strategy channel, right? I'm forgetting my intro, which is the channel that gives you tips, tools and advice for maintaining engaged and impactful employee resource groups that really make a difference in the workplace. Like, I put out new videos here every Tuesday evening, and I go live on Friday mornings at 8:30 UK time, here and on LinkedIn. So, you know, please do subscribe, share, all of that stuff. Right? I'm really rubbish at that stuff, that YouTube stuff. Anyway, so I don't think I've told this story on here before, but I was once doing some training to an organisation, which was a pensions organisation in the UK. And in the room, there was the co-chair of the Muslim network. And it was a network where engagement was really waning. And I'm going to be doing a video about that, you know, why engagement wanes when you're only doing events. They were doing like a monthly get together, and like people just weren't really attending. People weren't really that interested. And so I was sort of saying, you know, have you thought about doing different things like policy review? And this individual sort of said, I can't think of any policies where being a Muslim like has any bearing on the policy. I mean, you know, there's all kinds of things, right? We can think about like paid leave in terms of like having leave for, you know, Eid rather than Easter, for example. Or we can think about policy around how to support people if they are fasting. But actually the example that I gave her, so in the session, I said to her, well, you know, when you think about, for example, those moments in your life, you know, rites of passage or really important moments in your life, even like, say, bereavements or like when you lose a loved one, you know, all of these often have you know, needs that the individual has because of what's happened. And she suddenly thought, she said, oh yeah, because actually, you know, when, for example, if there is a bereavement in the family, depending on, you know, different beliefs, customs, areas, cultures, all of that sort of thing, you know, people may or may not feel that they are okay to actually go into work, you know, go into the office. And so actually they may need a dispensation from their line manager to be like, okay, you can work from home because of that bereavement and your faith, etc. So we had a whole conversation about that thing, but it just gave her an idea in terms of how she could think and come up with areas for which policy change would benefit members and colleagues with the same lived experience. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to keep this fairly high level. I have got a document where I list out like loads of different policies. That's kind of like something that I share when I'm doing my training. I think it's too specific, but if people want it, like put it in the comments and I'll do my best to remember to share it, which means I probably won't. No, I'll do my best to share it, honestly, because it's a list of the exact policies. So if you want to see that, put it in the comments and I promise you, I will make it available in the comments. But I'm just going to give you 3 lenses to use to come up with your own ideas within your committee or within your co-chair, between you and your co-chair and maybe even your sponsor, right? So the first lens is I want you to think about the employee journey, the employee life cycle. And, you know, if you're not sure what I mean, you could even Google it, because I want you to kind of think about it from talent acquisition, or TA as it's sometimes called, all the way through to like talent management and exit, or it's sometimes called like the hire to retire journey. So you're thinking about, okay, as an organisation, what are the policies and processes in terms of how we attract people to apply, how we source them, how we onboard and induct them, how we train and develop, how we allocate work, how we promote them, how, you know, all of those things, how we exit them, right? You just think all across the journey. You could even like, I often draw this like a funnel, either on its side or vertical, depending on what I'm doing. In the kitchen right now is whiteboard with a vertical funnel on it. So you can think about it all the way through the tunnel, and then you think for individuals or colleagues and or prospective colleagues with our shared lived experience, what are some of the challenges along the pipeline, or what would improve the experience and that sense of belonging and inclusion along the pipeline for those individuals? And that's where you potentially start to come out with some ideas around changing policy, whether it be around reasonable adjustments policies. I know that actually a lot of organizations have pretty good reasonable adjustment policies for workers, as in like for colleagues, but they don't necessarily have it around the attraction and selection processes. So they aren't necessarily even asking the question around kind of like, interview stage or attraction stage. Do you have any reasonable adjustments that need to be made as you go through the the application process? So that's just one example, right? So that's the first lens, the employee journey and the policy and processes that sit along it, that touch everybody, right? The second one, sort of linked to my story of the Muslim co-chair, is the human life cycle. I couldn't think of what else to call it. The human circle of life, right? In terms of these rites of passage that we all go through, right? Birth, we're all born, right? That's a certainty. Coming of age, God willing, we all come of age, and different faiths, different cultures have different celebrations. Obviously, you've got things like bar mitzvahs and, all kinds of things. Then you've got things like marriage, maybe. And is the marriage, is it same sex? Is it, is it male or female? Is it complete? Is it something else? You've got having children, right? What is that? Is it, is it fostering? Is it adoption? Is it guardianship? Do you know what I mean? There's all kinds of combinations as you think about these. And then obviously, towards the end of life, you've got loss, right? So all of these human things, aging, menopause, all of that, right? All of that comes into these things in terms of how we all move through the world and, in these different stages of our life and different ages. And so just, if you were to have like a brainstorm about that and then think about all of the different policies that support us at the different stages of our life, again, thinking about, okay, for individuals with my lived experience or shared lived experience of this community, of our members, where do the policies work and where do they not work, right? So that's another angle. The other lens that I want you to think about is member feedback. So if you do, for example, either an annual survey, which obviously, my recommendation is always that you do an annual survey, even if it's literally just like 5 questions, annual survey. And if one of those questions is, what's the one thing we could do next year to make your experience at work better? Maybe just looking for how many are talking about policies. Or if you're not sure, literally asking the question, if there was one policy that we could change for you, what would it be and how would you want it changed, right? So that's another way of getting that member feedback. So that's kind of like your 3 sort of like lenses that I would say can help to give you ideas. Then the other thing I would say in terms of like how you go about it, and I've done a whole video on like how to get the approval and everything, because you don't want to go through all of this pain of finding out how to improve things and then not be able to get it approved. So in terms of how to go about it, apologies for a meowing cat in the background, right? The one thing I would say is look out for other network leads that you can collaborate with on this. So when you have your monthly check-in with all of your network leaders, as all good organizations do, raise the fact that you are potentially thinking about, X, Y, or Z policy, and see whether anybody else also potentially has ideas, because, as I say, strength in numbers, right? The more weight behind it, the more likely you are to get it through. The more likely you are for it not to be blocked by somebody saying, oh, but have you thought about the XYZ network, And, we always hear things like joined up thinking, right? Leaders want to know that you've thought about it more holistically than just your little corner of the organisation. So definitely check in with your other network leads and also with your inclusion leads and your, people team and your HR business partner that's like responsible for you, or you're the member of the inclusion team. Other things to potentially think about, it's not necessarily like a lens, but in terms of something that you could that you could think about that might give you ideas around, particularly around things like leave or guidelines for line managers in terms of supporting individuals where, for example, they can't come into the office. As a rule of thumb, if you've got colleagues that would typically take time off for something, so they would take time off for a particular holiday or a religious celebration or a festival, or something's happened at home, if people are taking time off and there's no policy around it, and it's almost just down to the luck of who your manager is, that probably gives you an indication that there actually might be a missing policy. It shouldn't be down to luck. Like, people should be able to apply these things consistently. So that might give you some indication that there is something worth considering. And the other thing that I would think about as well is role design. If people have jobs where they have to effectively leave their houses and go somewhere to do the work, right? Whether that be an office, a shop, a factory, a hospital, wherever it be, I think you've got to think about, what is it that they are facing when they go into that new environment, and what is the support that they need. I know we often think about reasonable adjustments in terms of like the disability and neurodiversity lens, but I think you almost have to broaden it, thinking about like different types of lived experience, and just in terms of a really holistic inclusion lens, really thinking about role design and what that looks like. I think when I think about this, I think of the example of here in the UK, the last couple of summers, there's been what I would call is like unrest around immigration, so anti-immigration sentiment. And I know that in some organisations, they have had to think about things like, business travel policies, or even policies around whether people are able to even travel into their place of work because of their ethnicity or their faith, etc. So, just think really creatively at this, because, there is no lack of policy and or process that your ERG can have an impact on, that can actually have a really big benefit to colleagues and to the organisation. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. I hope it's given you some ideas. If you're still struggling, please put it in the comments, or in the comments let us know which policies you have had an impact on. But if you're struggling and want more detail, if you want that very full list that I've got of all of the policies, put it in the comments, and I promise you I will make the list available. That's it for today. Ciao.